I was grabbing a coffee with an old college friend recently, a guy who, by every traditional metric, is winning. He's 31, a senior analyst, and spends his weekends bouldering or fine-tuning a diversified investment portfolio. When I asked him when he was finally going to settle down and get married, I expected the usual tired excuses about not finding the right person or being too busy with work. Instead, he just laughed, pulled up a spreadsheet on his phone, and pointed to a column labeled Risk-Adjusted ROI. To him, marriage wasn't a romantic milestone. It was a catastrophic legal liability he had no intention of ever signing. He spoke about his life with a chilling, quiet precision. His micro apartment is a temple of self-grooming, high-end skincare, a perfect ergonomic setup, and a curated silence that he guards like a fortress. He reminded me of those beautiful ones from the Universe 25 experiments, the males who stopped fighting, stopped mating, and simply focused on his own sleek, isolated existence. He wasn't angry or bitter, he was just done. He looked at the traditional family unit not as a goal, but as a burning building he was smart enough to stay out of. What's startling is that he's not an outlier. By 2026, married couple households in the U.S. will drop to a minority of just 47.1%. The average man is now waiting until he's nearly 31 to even consider a first marriage, exactly the age when the analytical part of the brain is fully formed and capable of seeing the structural defects in the contract. We've been told this is a crisis of commitment-phobic youth or moral decay, but when you look at the cold math, it looks less like a failure of character and more like a rational, data-driven exit. Why are millions of men suddenly choosing to become the beautiful ones in a digital wasteland? And what happens to a civilization when its primary engine of protection and provision simply switches off?
That is a powerful image to start with, the spreadsheet.
It was chilling. I mean, truly, there was no emotion in it. It was like an analyst giving a report.
And that's really the core of what we're looking at today, isn't it? It's this idea that maybe, just maybe, this isn't an emotional problem. It's not a moral failing. It's a rational response to a broken system.
He's not broken. He thinks the system is broken. And when you look at a stat like 47.1%, that's not a fringe group anymore. That's a tectonic shift.
It's a signal of a kind of biological panic, a structural meltdown of a social contract that we've relied on for centuries.
Right. If we want to move beyond the usual political talking points.
Yeah, past the grievance. We want to get to almost a biological diagnosis of what's happening. We're going to look at what we're calling the rational exit.
Then the behavioral sink.
And finally, this idea of internal sovereignty as a response.
So let's start where your friend, let's call him Mark, started. With the cold, hard math. The risk-adjusted ROI. Because for so many people, marriage is this sacred romantic thing.
Or it's supposed to be.
But for this huge growing number of men, it's just a contract. And when they read the fine print, they're seeing that it's a catastrophically bad one. This reminds me of another story we came across, a guy named Elias.
Right, this is the architect, correct?
Yeah, the architect.
Okay.
And I think his story is so important because he isn't some guy who failed at life. This is a man who did everything we tell men to do.
He built himself up.
Completely. He spent his entire 20s just grinding. I mean, we're talking 80-hour weeks, sleeping at the office, building an architectural firm from the ground up. He was the classic success story.
He created value. Yeah. He built something tangible.
By the time he's 32, he's got it all. The successful firm, the assets, the stability. He's in a serious relationship with a woman he loves, and he's ready. He's ready to propose.
The perfect time, according to the traditional script.
Exactly. But then, just as he's about to make that leap, something happens. He goes to dinner with an older friend of his, a mentor almost, who has just gone through a divorce. Right. Because this wasn't some, dramatic TV divorce with cheating and screaming matches. It was a no-fault divorce. They just grew apart.
But the consequences weren't no fault.
Not even close. Elias sits there and listens as his friend describes how his entire life's work was essentially liquidated and redistributed. The business he'd built for 20 years, half the equity, gone. His home, sold.
Yeah.
A huge chunk of his future earnings, garnished. And he hadn't done anything wrong, legally speaking. He just signed the contract years ago.
He upheld his end of the bargain, but the terms of the deal were changed retroactively, in a way.
So Elias goes back to his office that night. I just have this image of him, sitting there at his drafting table, surrounded by the evidence of his life's work. He opens his desk drawer, looks at the design for the diamond ring he was planning to buy.
And then he opens his accounting software.
And he runs the numbers. He does what he called an actuarial audit on the institution of marriage, and the conclusion was brutal. He realized that signing a marriage license in the current legal framework was like handing a stranger a signed blank check against his entire future.
A 50% chance of a hostile takeover of his own life.
That's the exact phrase he used. A hostile takeover. And the odds were basically a coin flip. So he closed the drawer, he put the ring idea away. It wasn't even about the woman, he said. It was a retreat from a contract with a catastrophically negative risk-adjusted ROI.
It's the tragedy of logic, isn't it? The heart wants to make the leap, but the prefrontal cortex, the rational brain, is screaming that there's no parachute.
And that's where we have to really analyze this as an economic contract, stripping away the romance for a second, just as these men are doing.
Absolutely, because historically it was a very clear contract with symmetrical obligations. You could call it the provision legacy contract.
Okay.
Well, the man's primary obligation was provision and protection. Bring home resources, keep the family safe. In return, the woman's side of the contract was, broadly speaking, legacy and intimacy. A faithful partnership, raising children to carry on his lineage, managing the domestic sphere.
So both sides had clear duties. And if you breached your duties,
There were consequences. Social, legal, financial. The contract had teeth for both parties. But that has fundamentally changed, primarily with the introduction of no-fault divorce.
which on the surface sounds, well, more humane, right? People shouldn't be trapped in bad marriages.
And that's the social argument for it. And it has its merits, of course. But we're looking at the incentive structure it creates. When you remove fault, you remove the penalty for breach of contract.
So you can just walk away.
You can walk away for any reason or no reason at all. And not only do you not face a penalty, you are often legally entitled to a significant portion of the assets accumulated during the partnership, regardless of your contribution to accumulating them. This creates what economists call incentive incompatibility.
The game is rigged.
It means the incentives for the two parties are no longer aligned. For the higher earning partner, which is still statistically more likely to be the man, the risk skyrockets. You're asked to make a lifelong commitment and investment, but the other party can dissolve the partnership unilaterally at any time and still claim the rewards.
You're betting half of everything you will ever build on a coin flip where you don't even get to flip the coin.
And that's what Elias saw in his friend's life. It wasn't an emotional outburst. It was a rational calculation of unacceptable risk.
And what's so wild is the age this is happening. You said my friend Mark was 31, Elias was 32. The data we have says the median age of a first marriage for men is now almost 31, 30.8 to be exact.
That 30.8 number is everything. It's not a random cultural drift. That is a neurobiological signal.
And how is it biological?
For decades, the narrative was that men waiting this long were failing to launch. The Peter Pan syndrome, right?
Yeah.
They're immature, playing video games in their parents' basement.
Refusing to grow up.
But the neuroscience tells us the exact opposite is happening. A man's prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain that does long-term consequence analysis, risk assessment, executive function, it isn't fully developed, fully myelinated until the late 20s, sometimes even 30.
So wait, you're saying men aren't waiting to get married because they're immature? They're waiting because their brains have finally become mature enough to see the risk.
What we call commitment phobia might actually be risk assessment competence. His adult brain finally comes fully online, and it does the math. It looks at the 50% divorce rate, the legal precedents for asset division, the horror stories from friends like Elias's, and this fully formed analytical machine in his head flashes a giant red warning light that says, "Do not sign."
He's not afraid of flying. He's just the first one to notice the massive crack in the wing of the airplane.
The narrative is completely inverted. It's not a failure to launch. It's a refusal to board a demonstrably unsafe vehicle.
And that leads directly to that 47.1% statistic, married households becoming a minority. It feels like, I don't know, a line has been crossed that we can't uncross.
It is a tombstone. It marks the end of an era. The nuclear family is no longer the central organizing principle of American society. And to understand why the contract got so bad, we have to look beyond just the legal system. We have to look at the role of the state.
A government. How does the government play into this?
In the old contract, the husband's role as provider was non-negotiable. It was essential for survival. If he left or failed, the family unit collapsed. That gave him purpose, but also leverage.
He was necessary.
He was necessary. Today, the state has positioned itself as the provider substitute. Through welfare, food assistance, subsidized housing and education, court-ordered wealth transfers, the state now guarantees the baseline survival of a single-parent household.
So the government essentially came in and said, don't worry, we'll be the husband now, from a purely financial perspective.
And yes, the state has underwritten the risk of family dissolution. It has made the individual male provider, for survival purposes, obsolete at an institutional level.
And when something is no longer necessary, its value plummets.
The utility drops, the respect drops, and eventually the man himself looks around and asks, what is my function here? Why am I taking on all this risk for a role that's been outsourced?
Wow. Okay, so even if a guy is willing to ignore all that, he still has to go out and find a partner. He has to enter the modern dating market.
Which is its own special kind of broken system.
This is where that concept of the sexual Gini Coefficient comes in. Now, I know the Gini Coefficient is an economics term for wealth inequality, right? The top 1% controls 90% of the wealth, that kind of thing.
Correct. It's a scale from 0 to 1. 0 is perfect equality, everyone has the same. 1 is perfect inequality, one person has everything.
So how does that apply to dating?
When researchers apply that same mathematical principle to the digital dating marketplace, looking at likes and matches as the currency, the results are staggering. The sexual Gini coefficient on platforms like Tinder is higher than the wealth inequality in the most unequal countries on Earth.
Dang, so it's a true winner-take-all market.
The data consistently shows that the top 10 to 20% of men, judged primarily on hyper-superficial metrics like height and facial structure in photos, receive the vast majority of female interest.
Leaving the other 80% with basically nothing.
It's what some call a liquidity drought. For the average man, the man in the bottom 80%, the experience is one of profound scarcity. He can invest hours a day crafting profiles, sending thoughtful messages for zero return on investment.
It's like shouting into a void.
And it's psychologically brutal. So think about this from a rational actor's perspective. If you were in a market where the price of entry is incredibly high, you have to work out, have a great job, be interesting, and your chances of a successful transaction are near zero, what do?
You leave the market. You stop playing the game.
You exit. You conclude that the market has failed. And that exit, that retreat from the marketplace, that's where this story starts to move from economics to something much darker, a kind of biological retreat.
This is the shift into the behavioral sink. It's not just about being single anymore. I read this anonymous post from a young guy living in a huge city. He called himself an urban herbivore.
So shokudanshi, it's a term that came out of Japan maybe 15 years ago, but the phenomenon is now completely global, the herbivore man.
And his description of his life was one of the most haunting things I've ever read. He lives in this tiny micro apartment, a box. He's surrounded by millions of people every single day, crushed against them on the subway, but he's never felt more alone.
The paradox of hyperconnectivity.
Exactly, and he wrote about this feeling over years of his own protective instinct just withering away. He said, I have no desire to build a nest. I don't want to fight for territory. I just want to be left alone in my quiet, climate-controlled box.
He's not competing anymore.
He's done. He stopped trying to get promotions. He stopped dating completely. All he wants is to earn just enough money to pay for his rent, his food delivery, and his high-speed internet connection. He said he felt like his spirit was going dormant.
That phrase, going dormant, is critical because what he's describing is not laziness. It is a biological defense mechanism against an environment that is overwhelmingly stressful and unrewarding. It's the behavioral sink.
Okay, we have to talk about the mouse experiment, Universe 25. People throw this reference around, but I don't think they understand the terrifying details of what John B. Calhoun actually saw in that enclosure.
Don't. The details are what matter. So this is the early 1970s. Calhoun creates what he calls a mouse utopia. It's this massive enclosure. They have unlimited food, unlimited water, perfect nesting material, no predators, no disease. It was paradise.
With one catch.
One catch. Limited space. The walls were fixed.
And at first, it was great, right?
It was a population boom. They were thriving. But then, as the population grew and the density reached a certain point, their social structures just began to break down. A mouse, it's like a human. It's not designed to have hundreds of random stressful interactions every day just to get to the water bottle.
Social overload.
Complete social overload. And the society collapsed into chaos. You had hyper-violent gangs of male mice in the central areas just randomly attacking others. You had mothers who had abandoned their young or even attacked. It was a complete social apocalypse.
But there was one group that reacted differently.
There was a class of males who, instead of fighting, completely withdrew. They didn't compete for mates. They didn't engage in any social behavior. They retreated to the upper levels of the enclosure.
And Calhoun called them the beautiful ones.
And the reason he called them that is because they were physically perfect. All the other males were covered in scars and wounds from the constant fighting. But these mice, their coats were sleek, their bodies were healthy, they had no scars.
Because they never fought.
They never did anything.
Yeah.
Their entire existence was reduced to three activities: eating, sleeping, and grooming themselves. They were obsessed with their own physical maintenance, but were completely inert socially.
That's my friend Mark. The high-end skincare, the curated silence. He's a beautiful one.
It's a direct modern parallel.
Yeah.
Physically pristine, but as Calhoun put it, they were spiritually dead. They had lost the very behaviors that made them mice. And here is the most terrifying finding of the entire experiment.
That
Calhoun would take these beautiful ones out of the overcrowded hellscape of Universe 25 and place them in a brand new, spacious enclosure. A new paradise with healthy, fertile females.
nothing.
Nothing. They continued to eat, sleep, and groom. They never mated. The behavioral programming was permanent. They were broken beyond repair. They lived out their lives and died without producing a single offspring.
Calhoun called that death squared.
Yes. Two deaths. The first is the death of the spirit, the behavioral death, the loss of social vitality, the will to strive, to protect, to create. Once that happens, the second death, the biological death, the extinction of the group, is just a matter of time. It's a mathematical certainty.
Because when I look at the urban herbivore in his tiny apartment, that's what I see. I see the first death. I see a man whose core programming has been overwritten and switched to off.
And our modern environment is almost perfectly designed to flip that switch. You see, the problem wasn't just density. Calhoun's universe was what we'd call an exclusionary design. It only had one path to success, being a hyper-aggressive alpha mouse who could dominate the central feeding area.
If you weren't that specific type, you had nowhere to go.
There was no niche for you. And our modern digital and corporate world is becoming the same. It selects for a very narrow phenotype, the hyper-extroverted, self-promoting, constantly online personality.
The person who's best at building a personal brand.
Exactly. If you're a quieter, more introspective man, a man whose instincts are for quiet competence or steady protection, the system has no role for you. So like the mice, you retreat to the upper levels, you withdraw, you disengage from a game you are not built to win.
And technology is like pouring gasoline on that fire, right? This is that Fisherian runaway concept.
Yeah, it's an evolutionary concept. The biologist Ronald Fisher tried to figure out why some animals evolve traits that seem actively bad for survival, like the peacock's massive tail.
Right, it's beautiful, but it's heavy, it's cumbersome, it makes it easy for tigers to catch them.
But for whatever reason, peahens developed a sexual preference for males with bigger, more elaborate tails. So a feedback loop started. Males with bigger tails had more offspring. Their sons inherited the genes for big tails, and their daughters inherited the preference for big tails.
So the tale just gets more and more absurd over generations, driven purely by female choice.
Exactly. It runs away with itself, completely detached from actual survival fitness. Now think about dating apps like Tinder or TikTok. They're Fisherian runaway engines. They strip away 99% of what makes a person, their character, their kindness, their reliability, their scent, the sound of their voice, and they reduce them to a handful of photos and a line of text.
They select only for the most superficial, peacock-like traits.
Height, jawline, perceived wealth, exotic travel photos. Men are now in a frantic race to develop the most elaborate digital tale, whether it's through gym selfies or renting a Lamborghini for an Instagram shoot.
And the awful irony is that the traits that make you win on Tinder are often the exact opposite of the traits that make a good long-term partner.
That's the mismatch. The system is selecting for flash, for novelty, for the peacock's tail, while the traits needed for stability and protection, the very things a family needs, are rendered invisible and devalued.
So the system is broken legally. The environment is broken biologically. I want to go one level deeper. What is physically happening inside the brains of these men? What is the chemical difference between a man who retreats and becomes a beautiful one and a man who reacts in a different way?
To get that, you have to understand a specific part of the brain, the DMPFC.
DMPFC.
The dorsal medial prefrontal cortex. You can think of it as the brain's command center for social hierarchy. It's constantly running calculations.
Yeah.
Am I in a dominant or submissive position right now? Should I challenge this person or should I yield?
It's the part of the brain that decides whether to fight or flee in a social context.
Exactly. And it operates on a powerful neurochemical feedback loop called the winner effect.
Yeah.
When a mammal, any mammal, wins a competition, it could be a fight over territory or, for us, closing a business deal or winning a video game, their brain is flooded with testosterone and dopamine. But it's more than just a momentary high.
It changes the brain.
It physically alters the brain. That flood of chemicals causes an upregulation of androgen receptors in the DMPFC and other key areas. It literally builds more docking stations for testosterone. So the next time you're in a competitive situation, your brain is more sensitive to testosterone. You feel more confident, you're more willing to take risks, you're more likely to win again.
Wow. So success physically rewires you to be more successful.
Success breeds success at a molecular level. It's a positive feedback loop.
Which means the opposite must also be true, the loser effect.
And it's brutally true. When you lose, and this is the crucial part, when you perceive the game as being unwinnable, your brain does the opposite. Testosterone levels drop, cortisol, the primary stress hormone, skyrockets. The brain downregulates those receptors.
It goes into safe mode?
It shifts into what you call submission mode. It generates feelings of anxiety, avoidance, and a powerful urge to withdraw from competition. It's trying to protect you from the stress of repeated failure.
So, the herbivore man in his apartment, his brain is essentially chemically locked in a state of submission. His DMPFC has looked at the modern world and just waved the white flag.
It has run the numbers and concluded, we cannot win this game. Power down the competitive drives, retreat to the nest and groom. It's a biologically programmed protective coma.
But not all men who check out go into that coma. And this is where the gender divergence in the research really caught my eye, this parental investment theory. Why is it that men and women seem to react to societal decay in such different ways?
It all goes back to the fundamental biological costs of reproduction. For a female, reproduction is an enormous investment. 9 months of gestation, the dangers of childbirth, lactation, years of raising a vulnerable infant.
Her biological risk is immense.
So her core evolutionary strategy is typically risk-averse. When society becomes chaotic and unpredictable, the female instinct is often to circle the wagons, to demand more safety, more rules, more social safety nets, what we'd call communal rearing certainty. Preserving the nest is the prime directive.
Okay, but what about men?
A man's reproductive investment can, theoretically, be very small. His success has historically been tied to his ability to gain status and monopolize resources. It's a high-risk, high-reward strategy.
Go big or go home.
Essentially. And this leads to a fascinating divergence in behavior when they feel they are losing. When a man perceives his status as zero, that he has no path to acquiring resources, he doesn't become risk-averse. He becomes risk-prone.
He's willing to gamble, to flip the whole table over?
He wants a system reboot. He'll look for a Hail Mary pass. This explains the fundamental split we see in men who are opting out. They diverge onto 2 paths.
Path 1 is the beautiful ones, the withdrawal.
Total withdrawal, the protective coma we just discussed, but path 2. Path 2 is the authoritarian seeker.
Okay, go back to my friend Mark from the intro. When I was talking to him, he mentioned something else. He's become obsessed with watching videos of military parades and drills. Yeah, from places like North Korea or China. And he wasn't being ironic. He kept saying, look at the precision, look at the order. Everyone knows exactly what to do. He craved that structure.
Mark is a classic authoritarian seeker. His brain's survival algorithm is glitching in the chaos of the modern West. The social map is unreadable. The rules for success seem arbitrary and constantly changing. It's generating massive anxiety, so his deep-seated biology is screaming for a strong man.
He wants a dictator.
He wants a clear, rigid hierarchy, even if it's a brutal one. Because in a rigid hierarchy, at least he knows the rules. He knows where he stands and what he needs to do to climb. He would rather be a low-ranking but secure cog in an ordered machine than a confused and anxious consumer in a chaotic free-for-all.
So those are the choices. Check out and self-groom until you die, or pray for a strong man to come and impose order.
And for a while, that's where the analysis seemed to end. It looked like a hopeless civilizational trap. But then we started to see evidence of a third path emerging, a strategic response.
And this is where we get into monk mode.
Exactly. And to be clear, this has nothing to do with religion. It's not about piety. It's a deeply pragmatic, almost ruthless strategy of self-preservation and self-creation.
I read this blog post from a guy, let's call him Julian, who documented his process. He wasn't depressed in the clinical sense. He was just depleted.
He was exhausted by what he called low-quality incentives.
Right. He realized that his life was a cycle of chasing these cheap dopamine hits, mindless scrolling on social media, dating apps, porn, video games.
Activities that hijack the brain's reward system without providing any real-world progress. They give you the chemical feeling of accomplishment without any actual accomplishment.
So they scratch the itch, but don't trigger the winner effect. They don't build you up.
They do the opposite. They keep you in a state of passive consumption. Yeah. He recognized these as junk activities, so he decided to go on a total junk activity fast. He initiated monk mode.
Yes.
He cut the cord. He deleted every social media app, Every dating app. He canceled his Netflix. He stopped watching the news. He stopped drinking alcohol. He made a conscious decision to go into a period of extreme isolation and focus.
He treated his own life like a scientific experiment.
Analogy. He had one goal: to fundamentally alter his own neurochemistry. He described it as engaging in chemical warfare against a society designed to keep him weak and distracted. His mission was to maximize his testosterone and minimize his cortisol.
This is the concept of psychopharmacological capitalism. Hence,
Psycho, farm, capital. He started viewing his own brain chemistry as his primary capital asset. In a world where you can't trust the institutions, the only thing you truly own and can control is the state of your own mind and body.
So instead of spending his neurological capital on Instagram, he started investing it in himself.
He built his new life around what some call the 3 I's: introspection, isolation, and improvement.
Yes.
Introspection. He started journaling, meditating, actually figuring out what he wanted, separate from what society told him he should want. Isolation. He cut out all the noise so he could actually hear himself think. And improvement. This was the action part. He started lifting heavy weights, not to look good for others, but because heavy compound lifts are a proven way to boost testosterone. He started reading difficult books to rebuild his shattered attention span. He learned a new, tangible skill.
What did he report feeling?
He described a fundamental shift in his perception of the world. He moved from a state of threat perception to one of challenge perception.
And that's based on hormones, right?
It's the dual hormone hypothesis. When you have high cortisol and high testosterone, you feel stressed, angry, and trapped. That's threat. But when you have high testosterone and low cortisol, you feel calm, focused, and powerful. You see obstacles not as threats, but as challenges to be overcome.
So by cutting out all the digital noise, the news, the political outrage, the dating rejection, he deliberately lowered his cortisol.
He starved the stress response. And by achieving real-world goals, hitting a new personal record on his squad, finishing a difficult book, he was systematically triggering the winner effect in a controlled environment.
He was hacking his own DMPFC. He was manufacturing his own wins to rewire his brain for confidence.
He became his own strongman. He stopped waiting for an external authority figure to come and save him or give him a map. He internalized the authority. He drew the map himself.
That's the Übermensch pivot the source material talks about. All the energy and resources that a man would have traditionally put outward into building a family, a legacy, he redirects it all inward to build an internal fortress.
And the final stage of that process is what you might call stoic indifference. He reached a point where the chaos of the outside world simply lost its power over him. The political turmoil, the collapse of the dating market, the 47.1% statistic, it didn't generate anxiety anymore.
Because he wasn't playing that game.
He had built an internal state that was robust and sovereign. The storms of the behavioral sink couldn't touch him inside his fortress.
He stopped trying to get a better seat on the Titanic and just learned how to swim in the cold, open ocean by himself.
It's a radical declaration of individual sovereignty in an age of institutional decay.
It's an incredibly powerful path, but it's also a profoundly lonely one.
But the argument is that in the midst of a true behavioral sink, a strategic and purposeful loneliness is the only sane and safe place to be. It's the only way to preserve your own mind.
So if we pull back and look at the whole arc of this deep dive, it's quite a journey. We started with the rational man, with Elias the architect doing the math and realizing the marriage contract is a fundamentally bad deal.
The rational exit.
Then we descended into the environment itself, into Calhoun's rat utopia, and saw how our modern cities and digital lives are creating these beautiful ones, men whose instincts have been switched off.
The behavioral sink, the environmental trap.
From there, we went into the brain itself, the panic of the DMPFC, the loser effect, and this dangerous split between retreating into a coma or desperately seeking an authoritarian ruler.
The neurobiological panic for a map, any map.
And finally, we landed on this third path. This difficult, lonely, but powerful path of monk mode, of building individual sovereignty from the inside out.
It really reframes the whole male exodus. It's not a petulant protest, it's not a political movement, it's a biological correction. The environment changed so radically that the old programming no longer works, and so nature at the individual level is forcing a hard reboot, a recompiling of the code for a new, harsher reality.
It really forces you to ask where you fit in that framework. Are you still frantically fighting for status in the crowded pit? Are you one of the beautiful ones, just grooming yourself in isolation, waiting for the end?
Or are you willing to take that third path,
Yeah.
to step out of the enclosure entirely?
Because outside the enclosure, there are no safety nets. There's no guaranteed food supply. There's just you and the sovereignty you've built for yourself.
There's a final quote from the source material that just feels like the perfect summation of this entire arc. It's both a eulogy and a call to action.
Yeah, read it.
The 47.1% marker is the sound of the last bastion falling. The empire's fate is sealed in its demographic decay. In this twilight, the prescription is not to rally for a lost cause, but to embrace the solitude of the sovereign path.
And then it ends with this. When the walls of the old world crumble, only the wolves who learn to walk the wasteland alone will see the dawn of the next epoch. Nature does not reward martyrdom. It rewards absolute sovereignty over one's own strength.